Hey, welcome to Pilot Lounge. I'm Paul Harrop, and joining us over Zoom from Atlanta is Derek Vento, host of the Traffic Pattern Podcast. His day job is as an air traffic controller, and he is a student pilot. Welcome, Derek.
Thanks so much for having me, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity.
So you're a controller and you're learning to fly. That's kind of an interesting dual perspective on things. What's that like?
Yeah, pretty unique to say the least. The cool thing is I fly out of one of the airports that I get to control, so I typically know what's going on most of the time. I know the controllers that I'm talking to when I'm doing maybe some cross countries and solos and things like that. But it's pretty unique to say the least. I typically get a Bravo clearance whenever I want it. No, I'm just kidding. But it's awesome to know that on the other side of the mic, you're providing a service to the flying public, and you're wondering what these student pilots are going through on a daily basis. Even some of the professional pilots and the buddies tell you stories. But then when I get in the cockpit with my instructor, I'm flying, and I finally realize, wow, I'm probably giving these guys and gals transmissions a little bit too fast. I probably could slow down. So it's great to see what life is like on the other side of the mic, and it kind of puts your mind in this perspective when you're controlling that. We can't forget that although I have a job to do with issuing control instructions, that there is a job for pilots to do as well, and that's why they use the terms aviate, navigate, communicate.
Yeah, well, we don't mean to put you third on the list, but we just got to keep ourselves alive. So I bet your radio calls are probably the best student pilot radio calls ever.
We'll wrap right now. Let's do it. I mean, for the most part, yeah, Atlanta approach, Skyhawk 782 Alpha Lima. We're 3 northeast of Gainesville, 2.5 climbing to 3,500, looking for flight following Anderson.
I didn't notice a single and or in there. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
That's always the running joke that we get most of the time is we understand that pilots, especially those that are in different phases of flight, may not always sound the most smooth. And it's one of the reasons that I told you I wanted to talk about my top 5. And I call it DK's top 5. So in the air traffic control environment, we have what we call operating initials. And those operating initials, when we're talking with air traffic controllers on the landline, coordinating either in-house, what we call inter-facility or inter-facility outside the building, we essentially will use our initials to pretty much say, hey, listen, this is approved. So if I say, hey, APRAC Gulfstream 782 Alpha Mike, climate at 10,000 on a 330 heading, your control, approved, thanks, Delta Kilo. So I call this DK's top 5. And the reason this is so important is because I realize for all pilots, they need to understand that it's a process in building confidence. I mean, would you agree that it takes a little bit of time?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, it's like you get a little more comfortable with different things as you go along and get more hours. I mean, it's certainly.
Yeah. And I try to tell people through the podcast, don't forget, we are not the FAA police. We are not the flying police. We are there to ensure that you have every resource you could possibly utilize. And one of the things I think we'll get into here in several minutes is a concept that I think is also very key. But I think the first step to me is learn the language. And you're going to think this is kind of cheesy, but when I was coming up in air traffic control like 40 years ago, learn the language was big. I would literally look at the air traffic control Bible, what I call the 711065. But a lot of times I would stand in the shower and I would talk to myself. I would make radio calls. So for the pilot perspective, it's the same thing where you might just say, hey, Peachtree Tower, Skyhawk, 782 Alpha Charlie, West Tie-Down Ramp, 8 Charlie, request taxi VFR to the northeast. It sounds smooth and fluid on my end, but I would mess that up multiple times. And then there's another phase of flight because now you're airborne, right? So in that environment, you're on the ground, you're not moving around. It's very easy to kind of put your thoughts together. And we've got the writers. We call the writers and speakers. And you're writing everything down. You're trying to speak and you're trying to get back to me with everything that you want to say. And although it's a great tool, I think it comes down to memorization. What are you taking in and what am I giving you? And the concept really goes back to what we're going to talk about here in a second is read back, hear back, but learn the language, practice regularly. I mean, you know, Paul, like anything comes in due time when you have persistence in practice. So what I've said is this: consult various resources such as the FAR AIM and build a solid foundation for yourself. create an environment where you can engage with other students and study terms while practicing the use of their meaning.
So a lot of people like maybe sometimes vary from the official terms in the pilot controller glossary. What would you tell people that just kind of use their own verbiage there?
That's a really good point. I'm glad you bring that up. So whether it's an emergency or whether it's simply trying to share a piece of information to ATC, let's say a student pilot cross-country solo, maybe getting some VFR flight following, the professional pilot typically will say something like this. Atlanta Southwest 101, we're leaving 14,000 for 12,000. Any chance we can have 1,000? Pretty bumpy out here to sitting at a 14. Very professional, a little bit of plain English, but I know what he's trying to say. Southwest 101, Roger, to set and maintain 1,000. And he repeats it back. The student pilot may say something as like, hey, approach, it's like kind of bumpy here at 4,500. Just not really smooth. Any chance maybe we can get something a little bit higher, see if it smooths out? What I'm trying to exemplify is the process of utilizing what I call plain English. I know that they may not be the most smooth in that process. So if I can sort of have maybe that casual conversation, not like we're going to go on a date and hang out, but what I'm trying to say is I think a pilot has to remember that not every situation will dictate that you use correct phraseology, but it may mean that you use plain English. So for the pilot that's encountering an emergency, there are times where we have to get information, and those things will come down the bat, and I'll just say, Commander 782 Charlie, I understand you've got a medical emergency on board. If you would, just give me the condition of the patient and, speak in a manner that they can hear clearly and the information come over concisely. So in this case, too, it's why I always say that ask is number 2. So for a pilot that really just doesn't understand the phraseology, same way as putting it out, never assume. And that's why I say always know what's being asked of you. Never be afraid to question the controller if you receive an instruction that seems questionable or you simply do not understand. And that happens quite a bit, even for the professional pilots. The guy flying the G650, the 737 pilot flying in a Hartsfield. It's okay, but as you know, in an environment where aviation can be very inherently dangerous and forgiving, never assume.
Well, it's like one of my personal things I notice myself doing. I'll be doing pattern work at Frederick, and I'll read back what he tells me to do, and then as I'm about to turn crosswind, I'll be, Tower, was that left or right traffic this time? They kind of switch it up. So I'll ask him again, and I should do a better job at remembering which traffic pattern I've just been assigned 30 seconds ago. But it's one of those things, it's like he tells me and I blank out, and it's like I have to ask again because I don't want to turn the wrong direction and head somewhere and cause him a problem, cause me a problem, and cause somebody else in the pattern a problem.
The last thing that we want to do from a controller perspective is issue a pilot deviation, right? We don't want to put anyone in a bad spot. So I think that honestly goes back, though, Paul, to communicate clearly. So number 3 is communicate clearly, and that is very important because I'm not talking about a language barrier aspect here, because that is sometimes a thing that we do encounter from the ATC environment. And that's something that we work around and we're very patient with. See, people have this sort of idea that every controller is a grumpy person, right? And it may just be someone that didn't have their coffee this morning, which thankfully I've got my Starbucks this morning, so I'm good to go. But I think when you look at the big picture, using the correct phraseology most of the time will never get you in trouble. It's when we start to veer away from that can get us in trouble. So from our perspective, I say to you, Skyhawk 782 Lima to center maintain 3,000. And you say down to 3. Is it correct? It's correct, but it's probably not the most appropriate. Don't sit here and listen to live ATC because you hear a guy down the road, at 30,000 feet. Just kind of get lazy with the phraseology. You want to kind of mimic it and sound cool. Try to set yourself up for correct habits now. So when you are 45 years old and 50 years old and you start to slip in by then, you don't sound so bad, but I guess the point is use your call sign as well, as that is something that we find. I work the satellite sector here at Atlanta TradeCon, and I talk to student pilots and corporate pilots all day long. And it's very easy for them to just assume that it's just them and I on the frequency. It's just like we're just buds, like we're just hanging out. And I'm like, yeah, Archer 782 Charlie, flighting 300 to center maintain 3,000. 300, 3,000. And I've got 9 airplanes on the frequency, and I'm like, verify that was the Archer call and approach. I've got to have that call sign read back. It's not just about liability, but we've got to ensure that the correct aircraft are receiving the correct instructions.
Oh, for sure. You tell one person to do something. Well, that command for that person could be completely in the negative if somebody else does it.
Yeah, the funny thing that always kind of like throws us off every now and then is when you're talking to, let's say, the Delta jet, the A321, and you've heard a female voice for the last 20 minutes talking, and then the male responds, and you're like, wait, they didn't use their call sign. Was that Delta? You kind of expect a certain response, and that to me is a human element. That's human factors in itself. So you don't want to like dig yourself in that rabbit hole. So if the pilots can use their call sign and protect us, we sort of can have that safety net and know that for sure was the Archer. That for sure was the Delta jet. That for sure was the Hawker jet. Does that make sense?
Oh, it for sure absolutely does. And it's interesting to think about, to hear from your perspective how that all comes together. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And the part that we always kind of laugh about too is when we get those long readbacks. But fortunately, as controllers, that's why they take care of us so well. Is that there's a readback, hearback portion to that as well. So when I say something, it's not just saying it and then moving on. I've got to take in every little bit of that, So when I do give the control instruction, November 711, Charlie, Charlie, fly heading 360. Flight heading 360, 717, Charlie, Charlie. When I issue anything such as altimeter and the weather, I want to make sure you have that information. Weather is a big thing for us, and all across the agency, I think it's very important that even the VFRs get the weather. Just because you're VFR doesn't mean that you get less of a service or diminished service because you're not IFR. I think it's probably one thing I can speak on behalf of many controllers is that we treat every airplane as if there's no difference. That's someone's mother on there, that's someone's father, that's someone's son, someone's daughter, and they're expecting us to provide the best possible service, and that's what we're going to do.
So how much of a wrench does it throw in your machine when I blast off out of the Frederick class Delta, and I get frequency change, and I'm going VFR, and I'm not talking to anybody? Is that if I'm flying my, if I'm flying the correct altitude for the heading, and I'm not being crazy about it, just kind of point to point, which is how I do my cross countries. Does that really throw a wrench in your machine? Would you prefer that I be on flight following with you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that's going to be controller based for the most part. So I can't speak for everyone. When I'm pretty busy, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that talking to another airplane and hoping that they'll call me for flight following will essentially help me. But I will say, stay out of the Bravo, and that will definitely help. But we see airplanes take off, and you have to understand is that because we're not speaking to the aircraft, we can't necessarily verify that mode C portion of the transponder. So you have to be very careful. So if I see an aircraft take off out of PDK or Frederick, in your case, out of a Delta, and they're flying northwest bound, I'm not necessarily expecting that aircraft to climb to 4,500 because that's an appropriate altitude for direction of flight. I think what I'm expecting is I'm descending my aircraft out of 8 for 5. I'm on a heading. I'm constantly observing all known traffic. If I see that target start to climb, I'm going to turn my airplane out of the way. So I might just say, Hawker 682 X-ray Papa, turn 20 degrees to the right, traffic 11 o'clock, 6 miles northwestbound, altitude indicates 4,500. I've turned the aircraft, I've issued traffic. I'm still going to stay at 5,000 feet. So obviously people know for the most part that IFR to VFR separation is 500 feet vertically, or in many cases what we call green in between target resolution. So pretty much, pass off the side of the aircraft. Unless that aircraft weighs 19,500 pounds or more, then we're required to have 1.5 miles of separation. So you're trying to essentially look at all the different factors into play that will change your sequence. So I'm wondering, if that aircraft's at 4,500 feet, do I have enough time to descend that Hawker jet out of 5 for a lower altitude? So can I get through that altitude? So if that's the case, I might say, Hawker 782 X-ray Papa, turn 20 degrees to the right, vector for traffic, descend and maintain 3,000. Now I've turned, I'm descending, I'm using all of my tools to avoid that aircraft. If it's a point where I can't descend to do anything else, I'm going to maybe try to trust that mode, see if I can, and I might just issue traffic. And if I don't have many outs because there's other traffic in the way, that's kind of that risk that we take. But I think we do a good job as a whole of issuing traffic, being transparent. And before you know it, when I give that hawker 20 right, they'll say traffic in sight. So do I want you to talk to me? I'll be nice, be kind of cool, but not necessary.
I see why you air traffic controllers like your caffeine, because the game of chess that you have to play with all those factors and all those unknowns, man, I would not want to have to do that job. That is incredible. So keep going on the list. What are the other next step on the top 5?
Well, I got to be honest. Number five, Paul. Number 5 is have fun. So yeah, that's the last one. Number 5 is have fun. I would say that it is a process where people have to sort of embrace. And it's a journey along the way, and you don't get there overnight. I was on the 21.5 podcast last night doing a little show with them. And when I started to rattle off phraseology, like I was like, Delta 1421, traffic 11 o'clock, 3.5 miles, northwest bound, Boeing 737, 3000. Insight. Roger, Delta 1421, turn left heading 360, advanced field in sight. They were playing rap music in the background like I was rapping off. My whole point is that it didn't happen overnight. It's the same way for the pilot. The pilot didn't just go, oh crap, what do I say? It took him a while. It took her a while to say, traffic inside Delta 1421. Roger, Delta 1421, turn left heading 300, follow your company, clear visual approach, runway 27 left. Heading 300, follow traffic, clear visual approach, runway 27 left, Delta 1421. It takes a moment. It's the same thing being a Cherokee pilot. When I give a PTAC, it's the funniest thing. We call PTAC position, turn, altitude, clearance. So when you're getting a turn onto the localizer for an instrument approach, that pilot typically will botch it. So I'll say this. Cherokee 4, Charlie, 6 miles from Sham, turn left, heading 240. Maintain 3,000 until established on a localizer. Cleared ILS, runway 21 left approach. 3,000 till Sham, heading 250, cleared. And it's like, I get it. But I've got to go back. And unfortunately, it gives the pilot a chance to understand that I'm very patient. So maybe in that moment, if I don't have much going on, because everything is based on priority of transmissions, knowing what's next, looking ahead at my scope and scanning, I might come back to that aircraft and talk a little bit slower. Cherokee 7 Alpha Victor, 5 miles from Sham. Turn left, heading 240. Maintain 3,000 until established on the localizer. Cleared ILS, runway 21 left approach. And they'll come back and they'll go, wow, that sounded smoother and more calm. So we have to remember from the controller side that someone might be learning in the cockpit. We've got stuff we want to do, but they're learning too. So I think it's very important that we're transparent with each other, and also telling CFIs, hey, give your student a chance. Just because I'm busy doesn't mean that he can't try again or she can't try again. We've got to understand that if they don't practice, they'll never get it.
For sure. Well, I think it's, and you know this from being a student pilot, you got a lot going on in the airplane.
Yeah.
There's a lot
He's trying
of
to talk
noise.
to you. Hey, do the turn the plane. Do this. Like,
yeah, I got the engine spinning in front of me. I may have a second comm radio on guard where somebody's going meow and trying to listen. And then
That's
here
true.
we have this, this livestock auctioneer rattling off, who give me 25, and I'm going to turn left down.
Hey, Paul, I think you might have a career in that.
Calm down. Slow your roll a little bit. I got to understand what you're telling me to do with this airplane. So I'm glad that you have both experiences to understand how, complex it can be to listen and understand in the airplane.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things that the FAA does allow us to do, and our union advocates for, is familiarization flights. We call them FAM flights. Being able to get in the cockpit with a commercial airliner, for example, and maybe talk to those pilots above 10,000, of course, and just kind of see the environment they're in. We see that these aircraft, unfortunately, the Mad Dog was just retired by Delta, so we don't see any more of those. And that used to be kind of fun because you'd call traffic and you'd say, Southwest 642, traffic 10 o'clock, 3.5 miles of MD-88, or you call it a Mad Dog, descending out of 5 for 4, advised field in sight, or advised traffic in sight. And it was like, yeah, we got the dog in sight, so I missed that already, and it's only been a week and a half. But when you're in the cockpit and you realize, oh, wow, this aircraft is slant Zulu, these guys are having to really do some different things. They're having to really fly the airplane. Whereas the A321 pilot kind of sits back, a lot of leg room, and is like, oh, my joystick. And he just turns it, it's like, man, these guys have it kind of nice. So it's cool to see the automation. It's cool to see when I say turn left heading 180, them reaching up to the MCP panel, turning the knob. It's pretty cool to see how they're playing with that legs page, how long it takes them to insert a new fix in there and kind of move on. So you got to think they're getting the cabin ready in the back. They're doing a checklist. They're listening to us. They're looking for traffic. They're slowing the aircraft down. They're getting the flaps and the gear down. There's so much going on. And I think it's important that as controllers, we really appreciate the work that these pilots do and also show them a little bit of grace, even in those challenging moments, because I know they're looking at weather during summer months. We're looking at weather. We've got a game plan. They've got a game plan. Everybody has wants and needs, Paul. But I think when we work collaboratively together as a whole, it really, really makes things smooth and efficient.
I would agree with that, and I think it's great that you guys get a chance to go fly because, I have no idea what goes on in your world.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Come one day, we'll hang out.
I should probably come do it. I mean, I've been inside a tower and stuff, and gone taking other tours, but I've never been inside a Tracon. I don't know what that world is like. I'm kind of fascinated by it. I'm really glad I didn't do that as a career path. That sounds insane. But
if I turn my lights off in the living room right now, you'll know it's kind of what it looks like at work.
Yeah. So is it dark and kind of dim, and you've got is it like you see in the movies? You got the scope.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, the lighting is a little bit more lit than typically what you see. Some Tracons are typically pretty dark, but for the most part, big circle room, about 25 of us in there, maybe sometimes even 30, depending on how rough the day is and what scopes we need open. But we work as a team, and that's the cool thing is that when there's no traffic and we have a moment to have fun and laugh and tell a joke and catch up with how's your family been, how the kids doing, things like that. It's nice. But when you walk out of work and you realize wow, we really got ourselves beat up today. We ran triple ILS PRM, simultaneous approaches. There was weather over the final. There was weather 30 northwest of the airport, big major thunderstorm. We got aircraft diverted around it. We got all those airplanes in, and we landed 98 airplanes in 1 hour. That's pretty cool.
So a lot of pilots, I hate to say, I've flown in Bravos, but myself included in this, are a bit intimidated at trying to request a Bravo clearance. What would you tell a mostly VFR pilot, still building experience about operating within the Bravo? Is it something you would encourage us to do, or what's the message there?
That's a great question, Paul, and I'll be honest with you. Don't ask us. No Bravo clearances, and that's the running joke here in Atlanta with a couple of my friends that fly in the area. I would say this. I can't speak about all Bravos because I know some are very unique, but I would say is be ready. Don't be afraid to ask questions if you have any questions, but be ready. Typically, if you're outside of the Bravo, you're kind of resuming your own navigation outside of the Bravo, complying with altitudes, maybe trying to cut that corner. You can't be at 4,000 feet, so you go at 3,900 feet trying to cut the corner. Whatever you want to do, I would say is just comply with the necessary altitudes and restrictions that your Bravo obviously has. But here in Atlanta, I think that there is an expectation because of the volume of traffic that we run and how complex our satellite sector is, that pilots be ready. You've got to be ready. So if I'm giving you the Bravo clearance and you're not ready for it, well, it depends. Your student pilot might be your first Bravo. I expect that. But when you come off of Hampton, 3 southwest of the airport at 2,100 feet, I expect you to know I'm about to rattle this off to you. So and if you're like, hey, Atlanta approach, Skyhawk 111 Bravo, 2.5 southwest of Hampton, 2,100 feet, or Cessna 172 looking for VFR flight following to Cartersville, prefer over the top of Atlanta, please looking for our Bravo clearance. Squawk, Squawk 0141 IDEN. Squawk's the code. Radar contact 3 southwest of Hampton and show you at 2,500. Flight heading 350, cleared into Bravo airspace 4,500.
Copy, cleared into the Bravo.
Cleared into Bravo airspace. Yeah. You got to make sure you say that part. That's the whole big thing people forget is that it's not like 350 heading 4,500 feet. You've got to repeat that part that says cleared. Again, it's about liability. It's about ensuring that everyone knows that aircraft has a Bravo clearance. Stay at that altitude that they're assigning you, They're providing you a radar service. And when we do that, we are responsible for separation of that aircraft and other aircraft. We provide a service to aircraft that we can regardless, but you have to understand in the Bravo, when we give that clearance, we're pretty much taking on the workload of providing separation. You got to think, these Bravos, there's so many airplanes, giving traffic advisories to aircraft on flight following and whatnot sometimes can be workload permitting. So we do our best to accommodate as many airplanes as we can, but it gets to a point sometimes where we might not be able to do it. And I would say, be confident. And I suggest people go do it. It's a great thing because typically you get to see areas that you haven't seen before. The cool thing about Atlanta is our Bravo, we have this thing called the corridor, and we take aircraft right over the top. A lot of cool places. LAX has it. I think Chicago might have it.
Yeah, I've flown the
It's
Hollywood Park
great.
route over LAX.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, right?
Oh, it's amazing. You're looking right
Yeah.
down on LAX. It's crazy.
Yeah. And people love doing it for photography. So people are like, hey, I want to fly over, And we always tell, kind of most of our pilots here is, if we can give you a Bravo clearance and you can kind of circle around depending on the time of day, we'll definitely allow you to do it. But we don't let aircraft just sit in the middle and just do circles all day, loitering, But I think we have a pretty cool setup here in Atlanta. I think we do a good job of accommodating VFR airplanes. And it's fun. I really honestly can say, Paul, like how much you love doing this job is how much I love ATC. It's something so rewarding. Just last week, I'm working the Athens sector. I'm working 3247 IFR aircraft at 7,000 feet, flying north to south, going toward like Macon or Dublin. And I'm just switching him to approach. Like he just kind of flew through my airspace. I'm kind of just sitting there and I'm like, Centurion 711 Papa Charlie, kind of approach 124.2. 24.2 Papa Charlie. Hey, approach. Before I go, quick question for you. Yep, go ahead. Is this the guy with the podcast? Yeah, it is. Yeah, man, I just wanted to say I recognize your voice. You do a really good job, man. Thanks a lot. I'm like, thanks, man. Have a good night. It's like I can't sit there and talk with him forever, but I just thought it was so cool how I'm just minding my business and someone just goes, hey, is that the guy with the podcast? I'm like, yeah.
That's funny. Well, it's funny how you recognize somebody's voice. I was on a Southwest flight coming home from Los Angeles one time. And there was this guy sitting next to me, and I'm like, that guy looks really familiar. I can't place it. I don't want to talk to him, But I know, who is that? I know who that is. After the flight, he's thanking the flight attendants, and I recognize the voice. I go, wait, are you that guy from NPR? And it was NPR at the time's White House correspondent that I hear every day. And here he was on this flight. I didn't put it together until I heard his voice. So I guess you have a pretty distinctive voice. I'm sure I would probably recognize you on the radio.
Well, yeah, I think for the most part, my talking voice, like now, as you hear, it starts to change a little bit when I've got things to do and aircraft are checking in, or if I need someone to comply, I think my voice raises pretty good, like pretty high.
All right, give me your intense controller voice. Give me the I'm about to do something crazy in the airplane. You need to prevent me from doing it voice.
Arca 782 Alpha Charlie, turn right, heading 020 immediately to set and maintain 5,000. Arca 782 Alpha Charlie.
All right,
it's like that. I'm at that point. I'm pretty much like, hey, I need you to turn. I need you to do something for me pretty quick. Or if I've reached out to you like 5 times, Hawker 782 Alpha Charlie to set and maintain 4,000. Airport 11 o'clock, 6 miles.
Crickets.
Hawker 782 Alpha Charlie to set and maintain 4,000. Airport 11 o'clock, 6 miles. Hawker 782 Alpha Charlie Atlanta approach. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Yeah. It's kind of like, hey, let's go. We got things we got to do here,
Yeah, it's like you got to put on dad voice at some point.
Yeah.
When you can't reach an airplane like that, I always listen to Guard on my.
Oof, you're smart. You're already ahead of the game, Paul.
Is that where you go? Like, honestly, I assume that's where you would get to me next. Is that where you go if you don't reach me on the assigned frequency?
Great question, and it depends. So if you were previously talking to a controller, we have to understand that sometimes pilots like this thing called Sirius XM radio. And sometimes they flip the wrong buttons and switches, and they're trying to get their dose of their TV show or radio show, I should say, at 6,000 feet. Meanwhile, I'm trying to give them a vector. So they check in with you, and everything's fine. And then about 7 minutes later, you go to say, Sirius 122 Lima Victor to set and maintain 4,000. And you're like, well, he was just here. She was just talking to me. What happened? And you start reaching out again. And then you realize it doesn't work again. So I give 2 transmissions typically, and that's kind of where I start. And then I use a couple different techniques that we're all trained to do. Sirius 111 Lima Victor, Atlanta, if you hear this transmission, ident. So what happens is that your receive may work, but you can't transmit, and you don't know that because you're like, why is he calling me again? If I see the ident, now I know that this is pretty much a thing where they can hear me and I can't hear them. So a lot of times what I'll say is Sirius 1 Lima Victor, ident received. If you have another transmitter, try that. Second radio, things like that. They might try it, no response. At that point in time, if we're going to continue to issue control instructions, they're pretty much going to acknowledge with an ident. So Sirius 1 Lima Victor, turn left heading 270, acknowledge with ident. It's kind of a weird process. It's a very weird process, but you've got to remember that. If I don't get the acknowledgement of an ident, I do one other thing. Well, he just came from the southeast sector from Macon on 24-2. Macon Southeast Satellite. Hey, can you try Sirius 1 Lima Victor, see if he came back to you? Does that make sense? So you might have flipped the switch by accident and you're back on the other frequency. You just don't know it. And you're like talking to this guy down here and you're like, hey, approach, we're like 5 miles from PDK. Can we descend? And he's like, yeah, you're supposed to be on 2697. Like something must have happened. The last resort is going to guard for us. So I hit him on guard. Sirius 1 Lima Victor, Atlanta Approach Broadcasting on guard. Sirius 1 Lima Victor, this is Atlanta Approach Broadcasting on guard. If you hear this transmission, change to my frequency 126.907.
I've definitely heard that one fly.
There you go. And that's the big one for us is guard. Yep. So you do a great job listening to guard. That's perfect, Paul.
Well, for me, honestly, I fly around a lot of national security airspace. I've got Camp David. I've got, the Washington, D.C. area. So it's like I'm pretty good, and we have to take specialized training to fly near this. But, before I get intercepted, I know they're going to call me if I've somehow strayed into it. So I listen to that.
Oh, look, an F-16.
Hey, a free air show.
Yeah, look at this. This is a great air shot. I've never been this close.
Yeah, I've never done formation flying before. But yeah, no, and I think one of my pet peeves is all well, I can't call it what I normally call it because we're on video here. But we'll talk about it the garbage show, I'll call it, that some pilots like to use guard as a personal entertainment channel, and it's so annoying. I'm trying to fly the airplane and I'm hearing meow or crazy things that people put out there. It's like, come on. Do you guys have to hear that when somebody is transmitting on guard? Do you guys hear that?
Oh, yeah. Every position in our building monitors guard. We take it very seriously. I think over the last probably year or so, it's definitely minimized. I don't know. I can't speak for all areas of the country, but I can tell you within the range where we hear it down here. I used to work in South Carolina, Columbia, and it was bad in that area. But down here, it seems like for the most part, it's definitely scaled down quite a bit. People don't realize the totality of that because when someone, God forbid, needs to really transmit and get help, some guy at 36,000 feet who's cruising from here to LA is just taking up the frequency, and it's just not appropriate or cool. I got to be honest. I've got a great sense of humor. I'm one of those dark humor every now and then. I don't have any room for the guard thing. My one joke I make, and you're going to laugh at this, you might. Hartsfield, obviously. Those guys, Delta, that are pushing off the ramp, they're getting the aircraft prep. They're playing with frequencies, clearance delivery, and they're doing everything. And they'll just call and they'll say on guard. They don't know it. Ramp Delta 606, Echo 29 for push. And I just out loud, of course, don't do this. I say out loud in the TRACON and people give me a hard time. I go, push approved. I wish I could say it, but we're just teasing because it's like, and someone goes, hey, buddy, you're on guard. That to me is a cool, funny example, and they're doing it on accident.
Sure.
To purposely say, meow, I can't.
Yeah. No, I got no patience for it either. One of my other hobbies is ham radio, and it's like, I'm into all the arcade.
What's your top 5, Paul? Here we go. Derek Vento asking the questions now. Paul Harrop, welcome to the show.
Hey, Derek. Glad to be here. Well, that got weird. I feel like we just went to time warp or something. But no, you don't just clog up a frequency just to clog up a frequency, especially the emergency one. So I'm glad to hear that it's on the downward trend. I think I remember something about the FCC and the FAA trying to take enforcement.
Yeah, they're taking it more serious.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, Derek, what is next for you in your flight training? You're a student pilot. Where are you?
Oh, man. Yeah, so it's been a while since I've flown, actually, and I think a lot of it, too. We had some pretty rough weather here over the fall, winter months, kind of coming into February and whatnot, so I haven't flown a little bit of time, actually, and now I'm getting ready to move. I'm transferring to the New York TRACON, so I am moving to New York next month, a mix of emotions. New York's home for me, so I think I'll really enjoy it. There's something prestigious about that facility. I think, where some guys really, it's just a love, and there's that New York feel. And I know I'll have to change everything I say now to, a JetBlue 1421 New York departure at a contact.
You got to
I'll
say
get
it
it right.
angrier. Yeah, you can't be Southern and friendly anymore. You got to be,
Yeah. Derek, why are you so friendly to those guys, But who knows? Who knows what's in store for me? I think we'll definitely finish up the PPL. It's something I've really always wanted to do. I have a feeling I'm probably going to go back to school here at some point for poli-sci as well. So definitely got some things on my plate I want to knock out. But in the meantime, I've got a crazy awesome season coming up for season 5 of the Traffic Pattern Podcast. New cool guests, fresh guests, now including Paul Harrop, yet to come. Here we go. And I think it'll be a fun time. Oh, for sure. I think the more we can spread education, the more people we can entertain and have a good time. I'm all about good vibes and good energy, Paul.
You have good people on your podcast. I mean, you got Captain Tammy Jo Schultz for crying out.
Yeah, she was cool.
Man.
Yeah, she was really cool. And I think if I could say one thing about that woman, she is incredible in the sense that she has a story that is so genuine and unique. But it goes to show how aviation as a whole is so professional. And if I could just say this, aviation really is a profession of professionals.
I agree.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, and so many are very critical. I mean, you air traffic control specialists, you keep people separated. The pilots that fly commercially keep people alive. I'm happy to be a part of it, just telling the stories of general aviation, and it's a wonderful, wonderful industry to be in, and I hope it continues to grow strong. And I'm looking forward to seeing you finish your certificate, man.
I am. Me too. Me too. I got to do it.
Get you back in the air.
Yeah, I have to. I really, I got some things I got to knock out, but it's definitely one of the things on my list for sure.
Sure, man. Well, Derek Vento from the Traffic Pattern Podcast, thank you so much for hanging with us in the Pilot Lounge today.
Thank you so much, Paul.